Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a real giant of 20th century thinking.
A giant is definitely the right word for it.
Herbert Simon, a name that, pops up everywhere. Economics, psychology, and eventually even computer science.
Yeah, it is genuinely hard to overstate his reach. If you're in a business meeting trying to make a decision or studying how governments work, Simon's ideas are sort of the foundation under everything.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To really get our heads around his most radical idea.
The big one. The idea that the perfectly rational human, the one from all the classic economic textbooks, is a complete myth. He just doesn't exist.
And the reason we should all take him so seriously is his academic track record is almost unbelievable.
It's nuts. He's the very definition of a polymath.
The scientist, you could say. He took these scientific methods and just pointed them at messy social problems.
And look at the results. He published over 1,000 papers, but the big headline achievements just show you the sheer scope of his mind.
Right, so he wins the Nobel Prize in Economics, 1978, for his work on decision-making.
And as if that's not enough, he also wins the A.M. Turing Award.
Which is the highest honor in computer science, the Nobel of computing.
Exactly. For his work on AI and the psychology of how we think, it's an achievement that really no one else has matched. He was building these bridges between fields decades before anyone else was.
And his journey started in public administration, which was a field going through a huge change back then in the 30s and 40s.
A massive shift.
Yeah.
Before Simon, if you studied organizations, you looked at structures, you looked at the org chart, the boxes and the lines, the rigid rules.
The idea being that if you just get the structure perfect, the organization will run perfectly.
That was the goal.
Yeah.
But Simon was part of this new wave that basically said, hold on, organizations are made of people.
Right.
And so the focus shifted from these abstract charts to actual observable human behavior. They started pulling in ideas from psychology, from sociology.
So the question changes completely. It goes from what's the perfect number of people a manager can oversee to something more like
To how does a real person under pressure with limited information actually make a choice? And how does the organization itself shape that choice?
that is the core insight.
And that insight leads directly to his most famous theory, the one that anchors this entire deep dive, bounded rationality.
Which wasn't just a small correction to the old theories.
Oh no, it was a bombshell, a declaration that human decisions are not and cannot be 100% logical, and that we need a whole new way of thinking to explain how the world actually works.
Okay, let's get into that, because to build his new theory, he first had to tear down the old way of thinking.
Right, so Simon's starting point is so simple it's almost deceptive. He just says, administration is decision-making, full stop.
That's it.
That's the core of it. If you want to understand a company or a government agency, you don't look at the rules on paper. You study how choices actually get made inside it.
And before him, a manager would have relied on these big abstract principles of administration, right?
Exactly. You'd hear these maxims taught in business schools. Things like unity of command.
Meaning every employee should only have one boss to avoid confusion.
Or span of control, which try to figure out the perfect number of people for one manager to supervise. These were treated like, laws of physics for organizations.
And Simon comes along and calls them, what was the term? It was pretty dismissive.
He calls them proverbs and myths.
Proverbs. Wow. That's a burn in the academic world. Why was he so harsh?
Well, because from a scientific standpoint, they were useless. He argued they were just fundamentally contradictory.
How so?
For almost every one of these so-called principles, you could find another one that said the complete opposite.
Give me an example.
Okay, take specialization. The idea that you should break work down into very narrow, specific tasks to be more efficient.
Makes sense. The assembly line idea.
Right. But then you have another principle, coordination, which says you have to overcome all the little boxes and silos that specialization creates. You can't maximize both of those at the same time. They're in direct conflict.
So if A is a good idea and not A is also a good idea, then the principle itself doesn't actually tell you anything.
Precisely. It's like a fortune cookie. It sounds wise, but it's so vague it can apply to any situation, which means it predicts nothing.
It's not a scientific tool.
Not at all. And Simon's whole project was about making the study of administration a real science. He felt relying on these proverbs was like trying to build a modern skyscraper.
Yeah.
Using, vague advice from ancient architects instead of physics.
And this leads him to a philosophical idea he leans on heavily. Logical positivism. That sounds a bit intimidating.
It does, but the core idea is pretty straightforward. It was a movement that tried to draw a very hard line around what we can call knowledge.
Okay.
For the logical positivists, a statement only has real meaning if you can test it, if you can observe it and verify it empirically.
So how does that apply to the messy world of running a government agency?
Simon grabbed onto it because he wanted to strip away everything that wasn't a hard fact. All those proverbs and myths, you can't test them. So for a science of administration, they're irrelevant. He wanted to build a science based only on what could be proven.
And to do that, he needs a way to separate the provable stuff from the subjective stuff. This is where he brings in the fact-value dichotomy.
Yes, this becomes his core tool. He says every statement you can make about an organization falls into one of two buckets, fact or value. And for science, you can't mix them.
Let's break that down with an example. What's a fact in his world?
A fact is something you can test, something about the observable world. This bridge can hold 10 tons. Or, if we switch to this new software, our processing time will drop by 15%. That's a factual claim. We can measure it and prove it true or false.
So the science of administration should focus on finding the most effective, fact-based way to do things.
Exactly. Now, what's a value?
A value would be the goal, right? The should.
Precisely. It's a preference, an ethical belief. We should build a beautiful bridge, not just a functional one. Or we should prioritize user privacy over processing speed. Simon says science can't tell you which of those values is better.
But it can tell you the consequences.
It can tell you the factual consequences. It can say, choosing beauty will cost you X more dollars, but it can't say if that's a good or bad trade-off. That's a value judgment.
This sets up a really clean hierarchy, doesn't it? The politicians or the CEO, they set the value-based goals. And the administrators, the managers, they're the scientists figuring out the most factual, efficient way to get there.
And he illustrates this with another great concept, the means-ends chain.
Walk us through that.
Every decision is just a link in a chain. A low-level action, a means, serves an immediate goal, an end. So you take the bus to work, that's the means. The end is getting to your job.
But getting to your job is just a means to a higher end, which is earning money.
Which is a means to feeding your family, and so on. It's a ladder. And here's the crucial part. The decisions at the bottom of that ladder, which bus route to take, are almost purely factual, about efficiency.
And the decisions at the very top, like what is the ultimate purpose of my life, are almost purely value-based.
That's the model.
Yeah.
But this clean, mechanistic view of the administrator as a fact-based implementer runs into a huge problem.
The human being.
The human being. Once he established that administration is about finding the best factual means, he had to confront the reality that the person doing the finding is. Well, they're not a perfect computer.
Right. And to really appreciate how revolutionary bounded rationality was, we have to understand the model he was trying to destroy.
The old model. Pure, total, perfect rationality.
This is the mythical creature from the economics textbooks, the economic man. What kind of superpowers would this person need?
The list is just staggering. I mean, first, you'd need perfect information. That means you would have to know all possible alternatives for any decision you make.
Not just the obvious ones, all of them.
All of them. If you're buying a stapler for the office, you need to know about every stapler from every manufacturer everywhere in the world.
Okay, already impossible. What's next?
Second, you need to be able to predict all the future consequences of choosing each one of those alternatives.
Whoa, so not just the stapler might break, but the entire ripple effect of my choice across time.
Perfectly. With total certainty.
Yeah.
And then there's the third requirement, which is maybe the most impossible of all.
Go on.
You have to be able to perfectly value and rank every single one of those future outcomes. You need a stable internal preference system so precise you can assign a number to your level of satisfaction for every possibility and then just pick the one with the highest score.
So in choosing that stapler, the economic man instantly calculates the long-term impact on global metal prices, employee satisfaction, and the resale value of the office building in 30 years, and then just picks the optimal one.
Exactly. And Simon just looked at this and said, this is absurd. This has nothing to do with how real people think.
We have limits.
We have so many limits. Limited knowledge, limited time. Our attention is a scarce resource. Our brains just don't have the computational horsepower to process the entire world.
And because of those very real biological limits, our rationality isn't total. It's
bounded. That's the word. That's the revolution. It's a simple idea, but it moves the whole study of decision-making from the fantasy world of economics into the real world of psychology.
So what does bounded rationality actually say?
It says we try to be rational. We intend to be. But we can only be rational within the boundaries, the limits, set by our minds and our environment. We're always making compromises because we can't possibly search for and process all the information.
Which means if we're not doing that perfect calculation, what are we doing instead? This brings us to his most famous vocabulary, the difference between optimizing and satisficing.
Right. The mythical economic man. He optimizes. He keeps searching and calculating until he finds the one single, absolute best solution that maximizes his outcome. The perfect choice.
But the realistic administrative man, the one Simon describes, doesn't do that.
No. He satisfices. It's this great word Simon made up. Blending satisfy and suffice.
And what does it mean in practice?
It means we set a sort of minimum standard, an aspiration level. We think, what would be good enough? And then we start looking for options. The moment we find one that meets our good enough criteria, we stop looking.
We stop the search.
We stop the search and we pick that one. We don't keep going to see if there's a slightly better one out there.
Let's use a real organizational example, like hiring someone for a job.
Perfect. Optimizing would mean you'd have to interview every single potential candidate on Earth to find the absolute best person.
Which you'd never do. The cost in time and money would be insane.
Exactly. So what does a hiring manager actually do? They satisfice. They set an aspiration level. I need someone with a degree, 5 years of experience, and good communication skills.
And as soon as they find a candidate who checks those boxes and seems like they'll do the job,
the search is over. They make an offer. Because the cost of continuing the search for a potentially 1% better candidate is way higher than the benefit you'd get. That's satisficing in a nutshell.
that distinction really creates his two competing models of human behavior, doesn't it?
It does. On one side, you have the economic man, the fiction, the perfect calculator. Useful for abstract models, but useless for predicting what your boss will do on Tuesday.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have the administrative man, the realistic model, the person who accepts good enough because they live in a complex, uncertain world where attention is the most valuable resource.
He's not irrational. He's just realistic about his own limits.
That shift was huge. It gave scientists a model of human behavior they could actually work with, one that was flawed, limited, and observable. It allowed them to finally start building a real science of administration.
Okay, so if the organization is just a collection of these administrative men and women, all of whom are satisficing and dealing with their own bounded rationality, how does anything get done? How does a big company even function?
Well, that's the genius of Simon's theory of the organization itself. He says the job of top management isn't to make every decision. That's impossible.
Right.
Their real job is to shape the environment in which everyone else makes their decisions. The organization itself becomes a tool to help individuals deal with their cognitive limits.
So the organization is like a filter. It takes this overwhelming world of infinite choices and narrows it down to a manageable set for the employee.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a preprocessor. It limits the search space. It provides the key facts. It basically tells the employee, here are the 3 options that matter, and here's the good enough standard you should be aiming for. Without that, we'd all just be paralyzed.
And Simon actually broke down the process of making any single decision into 3 distinct stages.
Yes, a very clear, logical flow. Let's say we're a city government trying to figure out what to do about rising traffic congestion.
Okay.
The first stage is intelligence activity.
It's very cloak and dagger.
Yeah, but it just means scanning the environment. It's the process of recognizing that a decision needs to be made in the first place. So for our city, this is looking at traffic reports, hearing public complaints, and realizing, hey, we have a problem here.
You've identified the occasion for a decision. Then what?
Then you move into design activity. This is the brainstorming part. You invent, develop, and analyze possible solutions.
So this is where the city planners draft up different options. Like option A is build a new highway, option B is improve public transit, option C is implement congestion pricing.
Exactly. You're building your menu of choices. You're figuring out the pros and cons, the costs, the timelines.
And that leads to the final stage, which is choice activity. Simple enough. You pick one. The decision makers look at the menu they've designed and select one course of action. And if they're acting like administrative men, they aren't looking for the magical, perfect solution. They're looking for the first one on the list that meets their criteria for being good enough.
This structure also let him categorize the types of decisions we face. He made a big distinction between programmed and non-programmed decisions.
Yeah, and this is critical for how organizations work. Programmed decisions are the easy ones. They're routine, they're repetitive.
Like processing payroll or reordering office supplies?
Exactly. There's a standard procedure, a rule book. You don't have to think about it, you just follow the steps. The organization has already done the thinking and programmed the most efficient response.
But the hard stuff, the real challenges, are the non-programmed decisions.
Right. These are the new problems. The unstructured ones, where there is no rule book, they require real judgment, creativity, problem-solving skills.
Like how to respond to a sudden pandemic, or whether to launch a brand new product line. Those are perfect examples. And this is where Simon's foresight about technology is it's incredible. He saw where this was all going.
He saw that technology could turn non-programmed decisions into programmed ones.
He was a true prophet on this. He realized that the whole point of computers and mathematical models was to take these complex, messy, human judgment problems and turn them into a system, a routine.
And we see that everywhere now. Think about getting a bank loan. That used to be a non-programmed decision. A loan officer would use their gut, their experience.
And now, an algorithm does it. It takes hundreds of data points, runs them through a model, and spits out a risk score. It's basically an automated satisficing machine.
The algorithm has taken the messy design activity and programmed it.
It's made the decision more rational by removing some of the human bounds. And this is key. The AI isn't finding the one single perfect loan applicant in the universe. It's just finding the ones that meet a pre-programmed, good enough risk profile incredibly quickly.
It's advanced satisficing, just like you said. It's still operating within bounds, the bounds of its data and its code, but those bounds are way wider than a single human's.
Absolutely. Technology is just a tool to make administration more rational by turning the unstructured into the structured. Simon saw that in the 1940s and 50s.
So if the organization's job is to manage all this bounded rationality, how do they actually do it? How do managers get employees to make choices that are good for the whole company?
They use what he calls mechanisms of influence. He splits them into internal and external methods.
Let's start with the internal ones, the more psychological tools.
So internal influence is all about shaping the employee's own decision-making premises. This is stuff like training, which gives them the facts they need, but it's also about building habits and routines.
And cultivating attitudes, right, like loyalty.
Loyalty is a huge one. On the one hand, it's great. It helps ensure that when an employee is choosing a good enough solution, their definition of good is what helps the organization, not just what's easy for them.
But you mentioned it can be a double-edged sword.
It can, because strong loyalty can also make you blind. It can narrow your focus so much that you don't even see other, better alternatives that might come from outside the company's way of thinking. It can actually create smaller, more rigid bounds on your rationality.
It makes you a good soldier, but maybe a bad innovator.
That's a great way to put it. Then you have the more obvious external influence. Authority and advice. But Simon's take on authority is really interesting. It's not about power from on high.
It's psychological. It only works if the person on the receiving end accepts it.
That is the absolute key. Authority isn't about the boss shouting orders. It's about the employee willingly choosing to let the boss's decision guide their actions. And this leads to one of his most important concepts, the zone of acceptance.
Let's define that, because it's so useful for understanding how offices actually work.
The zone of acceptance is the range of orders an employee will follow without question. If your boss tells you to file a report, answer an email, attend a meeting, stuff that's part of your job, it falls within that zone. You just do it.
You don't reevaluate the decision from scratch.
You don't. You accept their authority. But what if your boss tells you to do something that's clearly outside that zone?
Like go wash my car or do something unethical.
Right. Or something dangerous. The employee will likely refuse or question it or quit. The authority vanishes because the order is seen as illegitimate. It falls outside the zone of acceptance.
So even in a strict hierarchy, power is always a two-way street. It depends on the consent, even if it's passive consent of the governed.
Exactly. Authority is a negotiated boundary, not an absolute power.
Okay, so Simon is trying to build a true science of administration. A science needs a way to measure success. What was his ultimate yardstick?
For Simon, it all came down to one word: efficiency. That was the hard, objective, factual standard that all administrative choices should be judged against.
How did he define efficiency?
Very simply, it means getting the biggest result for the given amount of resources.
The best bang for your buck.
Exactly. The cheapest means, the fastest route, the solution that uses the least amount of time, money, and effort to achieve the goal that has already been set. If you have two ways to get to the same end, the more efficient one is always the better administrative choice.
It's a very clean, rational standard. Okay, so we've covered his massive contributions, the administrative man, satisficing, bounded rationality. But to do a proper deep dive, we have to look at the other side, the critiques, the weaknesses.
Absolutely. And his model, because it was so rational and mechanical, drew a lot of fire from people who felt he'd left out the most important parts of organizational life.
The first big one being that he just ignores the human elements.
That's the one you hear most often. Critics said he treats an organization like it's a machine, a predictable system, and forgets that it's full of messy human beings.
It misses the politics.
Totally. The emotion, the egos, the power struggles, real decisions in an office are often made to win a political battle or to satisfy a manager's pride, not because they're the most efficient. Simon's models don't really have a neat little box for that kind of stuff.
He focused on our cognitive limits, but maybe missed our emotional and political limits.
I think that's a fair way to put it. And the second huge critique goes right back to his foundation, the fact-value dichotomy.
The idea that you can neatly separate the facts of how from the values of what.
Right. Critics argue that in the real world, that's a false distinction. You can't actually separate them.
Why not?
Because the very act of choosing which facts to pay attention to is itself a decision driven by values.
So if I'm a city manager and I decide to only measure the financial cost of a new project, I am making a value judgment.
Exactly. You're implicitly valuing financial cost above other things, like environmental impact or social equity. By pretending your decision is based purely on facts, you're hiding the underlying values that are really driving the choice.
So it creates this illusion of neutrality. An administrator can say, I just chose the most efficient option, and it sounds objective.
When in reality, that choice might be serving a very specific political agenda that prioritizes profit over people or speed over safety. The critique is that the model can be used to disguise political decisions as scientific ones.
Which leads right into the next complaint. His narrow focus on efficiency as the be-all and end-all.
Yes. Critics asked, is efficiency really the only thing that matters, especially in public service?
Sometimes things like justice or fairness or public trust are way more important than just being cheap and fast.
Absolutely. A highly efficient policing strategy that's unjust is a complete failure of administration, no matter how much money it saves. The model struggles when a less efficient path is actually the more moral or more just one.
And what about the behavioral critique of satisficing itself? Isn't settling for good enough just a recipe for mediocrity?
That's a powerful argument. If the standard in your organization is just to be good enough, what pushes you to innovate, to strive for excellence?
It could become an excuse for laziness, right? Or for just maintaining the status quo.
It could. A manager could defend a terrible but functioning system by saying, well, it suffices. It doesn't encourage that drive for continuous improvement.
And the last big critique was about the model's scope.
The Western bias.
Right.
Simon's theories were built on studying American organizations in the mid-20th century. Stable, bureaucratic, relatively transparent institutions.
And the critics argue that his models just don't apply everywhere.
Exactly. Think about administration in a developing country, where things like corruption or informal social networks might be way more influential than any formal, rational process. In that context, the idea of a clean, means-ends chain focused on efficiency might be completely naive. The real decisions are driven by a totally different logic.
So despite all those critiques, and they are very serious, valid points, what's the final verdict on Herbert Simon?
I mean, the critiques are important, but his contribution is still just massive. He didn't just add to the conversation. He fundamentally changed the entire conversation.
So let's recap the big takeaways. He taught us to see organizations primarily as structures for making decisions.
He gave us bounded rationality, this crucial idea that we satisfice, we don't optimize.
He gave us the realistic administrative man to replace the mythical economic man.
And he gave us the zone of acceptance, a much more nuanced, psychological way of understanding authority.
His work really was the bridge that connected the inner workings of the human mind to the formal structures of our institutions.
It was a breakthrough. It remains the starting point for anyone who's serious about studying management or behavioral economics or AI today.
And let's bring it back to that AI point, because you said he foresaw how technology would be used to make decisions more rational.
This is maybe the most important legacy for you listening today. Just think about modern machine learning. What is it, really?
It's an algorithm searching through huge amounts of data to find a solution.
Right. But it's not searching for the one single, perfect, universally optimal solution. That's computationally impossible, even for an AI. It's designed to satisfy us. It searches within its own massive but still finite bounds to find the good enough or the most probable answer to whatever problem you give it.
So the very tools we've built to get around our own bounded rationality are themselves operating on the exact same principle.
They are structurally bounded. They are satisficing machines, just as Simon would have predicted.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought.
Yeah. If we keep outsourcing more and more of our decision-making to these incredibly efficient AI systems, if the AI handles the intelligence in the design stages, what's left for the human administrative man?
Does our role shrink to just setting the top-level goals, the values? We tell the AI what to achieve, and it figures out the most efficient factual means to do it.
And if that's the future, how do we make sure that the values we feed into the machine are the right ones? How do we make sure our own thinking about those big picture goals isn't being subtly limited or biased by the very tools we created to overcome our limitations in the first place?
Something to think about for sure as the administrative man evolves for the age of the algorithm.